Hey, Mr. McLaren here. I'm going to be going over the cells to organism hierarchy notes. I'm going to be switching a little bit between this PowerPoint that I'm in right now and let's see, and the notes that I have in front of me right here. So basically, these notes you need to be filling out while I'm covering it in the slides. I'll be flipping back and forth to kind of show you what it looks like. Essentially, what we see on the slides here, yeah, because we're okay, good. So on these slides, we're going to be looking at how cells end up becoming an organism, and where there's red words, that's a vocab word, and then when there's blue words, those are examples. So those are things that we should be writing into our data table. Essentially, if you see red or blue on these slides, we need to be writing it down, which is a good reminder for me. So we've got what is a cell, organism, and then so if we're talking about what cells really are, they're what make things living. But if we're talking about the whole thing, that's what we would call an organism. Anything really can be considered an organism as long as it's alive. It could be, for example, a panda bear. But the question is, how do we get a panda bear from these things that have like mitochondria and chloroplasts and all kinds of stuff? Well, there won't be a chloroplast in a panda, in its cells at least, maybe in its stomach. So if we're talking about multicellular organisms, there's a couple different types. But some examples would be plants and humans. So we've got like multicellular, sometimes you have unicellular organisms, but in general, these are larger when we're talking about them. So if we flip back to our paper, we've got, sorry, on our paper, levels of organism from simple to more complex. So we've got simple here to most complex all the way down at the bottom. So most complex would be organism. And some examples from the animal side for organism. So if we're looking at animal side, organism, I believe we were looking at plants and humans. So if we're talking about this, we can write down like humans. Go ahead and write down some other examples. Some other things that would come to mind for me would be like a cat, because I love cats, and like a squirrel, a deer, anything that's an animal, right? That's an example of an organism. So you could also do like dogs, cats, etc. For plants, this might be like, I don't know, like say a tomato plant. So we got tomato. You might have like an oak tree. You might have things even like a fern. There's all kinds of examples of organisms. So these are just a couple. You should add to this a couple ones yourself. So just take a second to do that. And then I'm going to go back to the slides. So here we are, back on the slides. I wish I had a second monitor at home. I have one, but not here at work. So we've got cells in a human. So we've got like red blood cells and nerve cells. And yeah, here we go. So cells would be the most simple level. That actually, this should be in red right here. I should change that. But examples of this in a human would be like a red blood cell or a nerve cell. Red blood cells, they're in your blood, they transport oxygen. Nerve cells, these are the things like if you've ever like hit a nerve, it twinges a little bit. It controls every single muscle in your body. So whenever you have a muscle, you have nerve cells going to that, telling it when to contract, signals from the brain. So if we go back to the paper, we've got, let's see, here we go. At the top of this, we can go with cells. And so cells, I believe the two examples that I went over was a red blood cell and a nerve cell. Then you can add in other ones if you know them. This one probably you don't know as much about that. And then I think for the plant one, we were just looking at, so I'll flip back to that. Here we go. For plants, they have like root hairs and leaf guard cells. I don't know why I didn't include what these things do. A root hair, it's really interesting if you look really close at roots. They're covered in things that look like hairs. They're basically just increasing the surface area so nutrients can diffuse into them faster. And a leaf guard cell opens and closes to let water out, I believe, and oxygen out and carbon dioxide in, or vice versa if conditions are making the plant aerobically respirate. So let's go back to our notes. If I almost like hit my projector, I don't need to do that. Silly McLaren. So I think we had root, hair cell, and a leaf guard cell. Okay, so we've got these things that are like transporting blood around, things that are making muscles contract, but we have to talk about how they do that. And how they do that is they work together. So if we have a multicellular organism, you're going to have cells working together in these groups that end up working together in these larger groups, and eventually you've got the whole organism. It's kind of like hierarchies, like if you have like a king and some dukes and some lords and then some knights and then like servants, essentially. That's why it's called hierarchy of life, like the hierarchies like society, right? So let's go ahead and look at these three, what we can talk about between the cells and the organism in terms of levels of organization. Okay, so let's go back. We got tissues. No, not like Kleenex. A tissue is a group of cells that do a job together. So for example, we've got muscle tissue. So these are like muscles. But muscle tissue can be found in different organs besides muscles. So for example, the heart needs some muscular tissue in it to contract, but it also needs nerve tissue in it to tell it when to contract. So a lot of times you have these tissues that are parts of like organs, and then those can do a job as well. So let's go ahead and flip back to this here. So we've got tissue, and an example of this would be like muscular tissue, and another one would be what was it that I just had? Geez. Nerve tissue. Okay. I'm getting nervous writing about nerve tissue. Okay, so yeah, bad puns. It's part of dealing with me, huh? Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the next one. We've got tissues in a plant like epidermal tissue and vascular tissue. So epidermal, if you know dermal, that means like skin, and then epi, that means top or highest. So this is the highest level of skin for a plant. It's the outer layer. Essentially, it's skin. If we've got vascular tissue on it, though, we've got vascular. If you've ever heard of like the cardiovascular system, it has to do with breathing and transportation. I think cardio is the breathing side, and then there's the vascular, which helps get materials to different parts. So plants, they don't have cardio, but they do have vascular. So they've got vascular tissue that transport materials that they get in their roots. It goes up to the tips of the leaves, and sometimes a little bit of water will, well, not sometimes, some water will evaporate at the ends of the leaves. But there's all these nutrients that are getting pulled up through the roots. And then also when there's sugar being produced in the leaves, that gets pulled down. And I'm like talking with my hands right now, and I'm realizing you can't see it. So sorry about that. Okay, let's flip to the notes. I think we had, there's vascular tissue, and I think the other one was epidermal tissue. Okay, so we've got that. We're 2/3 of the way through. We just need these other two because tissues come together to make, and some of you probably can guess. So why don't you go ahead at this time, guess as to what you think it is. I think I may have already said it, but it is a drumroll organ. So if we have all these tissues put together, you can have an organ that has a job, but it has to have these pieces coming together to do said job. So an organ, for example, we have like lungs and heart. It's kind of weird to think of the skin as an organ, but it is. It has a specialized job. And it has a couple different tissues going on it. Like not all these cells in here are the same. They've got different jobs. It's kind of weird to think about it, but if you've ever thought about like hairs standing up on the skin, there's actually muscles involved in that. And if you're thinking about the lungs, there's quite a few different bits of tissue there. There's things that are like holding its shape, like being fairly rigid, so like connective tissue. And then there's muscular tissue that's in the diaphragm and in your ribs. I've forgotten what those are called off the top of my head. But there's all these different tissues that are involved in doing the job that this organ has to do. And so let's go ahead and flip back to the notes. And we've got an organ here. And then an organ is, for example, like skin, not skin. The heart and the lungs. Now, if you feel comfortable writing in some other organs, you can do that and then check with me to see if you got it right for a packpaw or a McBuck. If I'm still doing that, I don't know. Well, I'm recording this. I just created this classroom currency, and we'll see if I still do it by the time I have you. If this is not the year that I'm recording, you're probably very confused. So we've got organ. We've got a couple different organs in like a human right there. And let's go back to here. We've got plants. So plants have all these different, essentially they're organs, like leaves, stems, roots, and flowers. Plants are kind of weird because their organs vastly change as they grow up, and they can create new organs, like new leaves, or new stems, or new flowers. It's very, very different, but at the same time, these things have different tissues in them, allowing them to do what they need to do. For example, a stem has to have that vascular tissue on the inside, epidermal tissue around it. So there's a lot of different tissues there in these structures. So we would call them organs. So if we go back to our notes, we've got organ, and we should be writing in here, I think there was like leaves, stems, roots, and flowers for the ones that do produce flowers. This is for like what we would call angiosperms, like flowering plants, not gymnosperms, things that don't have flowers. They have different structures, so they would have different organs. But that's like us. We have slightly different organs than other mammals. For example, some animals, they don't use eyes. They're blind. So yeah, like not all creatures have the same organs is essentially what I'm trying to get at. Or they might use them a little bit differently. So yeah, let's go ahead and go down to the last one, hey? We're almost there, home stretch. Okay, so organ to systems. So what we can say is we've got a body system. I've also heard it sometimes called an organ system. Either is fine, but we're going to call it body systems just so we're all clear on this. So we've got body systems, and these things are like the muscular system, circulatory system, respiratory system, digestive system, excretory system, and nervous system. Uh, Essentially, there's all these different things that are working together to do a job. For example, the digestive system, it has organs in it like the stomach or the large intestine or even your mouth. There's all these different structures that work together to do a job, like digesting food and making nutrients accessible. So if we go ahead and flip to our notes, let's go ahead, go back there. We've got body system. And I'm going to write down all of them. I just need to look at my my notes. So muscular. I'm going to just say that you can just write down the first word. These are all systems. So circulatory, which is like your blood and your heart and whatnot. Muscular is like your muscles all around your body, used in movement. Respiratory, so that's for like breathing. And then digestive, excretory, and nervous. And if you need to, you can go back to the slide if you can't read any of that handwriting. I know it's getting a little sloppy there. Okay, so let's flip back. Go to the main body systems in plants. So there's root system and shoot systems. That's one way of looking at some plants. There's others that are a little bit different, but this is the general structure that you see in plants. So you've got roots, so all these things collecting nutrients from the soil, and then you've got shoots, which have all kinds of jobs like reproducing and getting sunlight, like getting energy, so that they can make those nutrients usable and incorporate them into their bodies. So you got those two different systems with their different jobs. So we got root system and shoot system. So in your notes, go ahead and write that down here. We've got root system and the shoot system. So we've got basically these notes done. Pretty straightforward. There is a slight twist. I think I haven't printed it out right now, but I am going to share the PowerPoint with you as well. So if you're looking at the PowerPoint, the final slide here is essentially just kind of reviewing. When we have an organism, it's made up of different body systems, which are made up of different organs, which are made up of different tissues, which are made up of different cells. So there's all these different levels that you can talk about. And it's really interesting kind of thinking about organisms and how they developed. So like originally there was these cells, and then they kind of maybe balled up together, and then they were able to work together more efficiently. And then that ball of essentially just tissue started to specialize more and be able to break down things better and be a little bit stronger, so on and so forth, until you got what would eventually be some organs in that ball of cells, which would then refine and become better through natural selection. So yeah, you got really kind of an interesting way of looking at this by looking at the different hierarchical levels of organization in, for example, the human body. Now, before I end, you do also need to write down these red words and their definitions on a separate piece of paper. I don't think I really need to show that to you. It's pretty straightforward. So you need to write down organism, which is a living thing, and then tissue, you need to write that down and its definition right here: a group of similar cells that are specialized to perform a particular function. Organs, write that and its definition down, so a group of specialized tissues that are gathered in a certain place. And then body system, different organs working together to perform a major function in an organism. And yeah, I think that's all for those words. Cool. All right. Well, thank you for joining me. This has been Mr. McLaren.